Anna here, and thanks so much for being here. So today's video is a book review, and the book I am reviewing is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So as you can see, I listened to this one on audiobook, but I'm gonna go ahead and just do a brief summary that I wrote up for my blog, and I'll have that posted below like usual. So the summary I have is: the strongest warrior of all of Greek, Achilles, son of the sea goddess Thetis and King Peleus, might as well have been a god in the eyes of man, especially one man in particular, Patroclus. Born a prince, Patroclus is exiled as a young boy and sent to live with King Peleus. He becomes a confidant of Achilles and so much more. They will go to the ends of the earth for each other, and soon that is put to the test. Barely young men, they are sent to the Trojan War to fight the Troy army and rescue Helen of Sparta, the woman who launched 1,000 ships. Like all Greek legends, there are prophecies surrounding the great heroes that fight. Achilles' prophecy was that he would be greater than his father, but his downfall is the death of Hector. In a battle of men and egos, Achilles' own pride and stubbornness quickly brings about his unlucky fate, as these two men are pushed towards a destiny that the fates themselves foretold. So this very much Madeline Miller's story of the Song of Achilles is essentially a retelling in sorts. So I am a big lover of Greek history. I do love Greek history. I've always been fascinated by it, especially as a young child. I just found it really interesting, all these stories of these myths and these legends and the gods with Zeus on Mount Olympus. Like, all of that was always so fascinating to me. So this naturally would be a book that kind of sparked my interest. And I had heard as a child about Homer. Like, you can't study Greek history and not know a bit about Homer. But I had never actually read, and I still haven't read, the Iliad. I've heard of it, but I have not, confession time, I've not read it. And thus, I also didn't know the full story of Troy. I knew about the whole Trojan horse, and I had heard of Helen and how she was so beautiful that men from all over came to try to save her in this war. Like, I knew that part of it, but I honestly am ashamed as a Greek lover, like history lover, to admit that I didn't know that Achilles played such a huge part in that whole battle. Like, I had heard of Achilles, again, of course I'd heard of Achilles, and you know, Achilles' heel, his weakness, it's literally a part of our body. I had heard of his, essentially his weakness. I had heard of that. I'd heard about how he was like impenetrable, other than this one weakness that brought him to his knees. I didn't know though that he tied so much to the Troy War, and didn't realize that until I listened to this book. So that was a nice little lesson for me to learn. And of course, since I didn't really know much about Achilles other than like bare surface level, I had no idea who Patroclus was, unfortunately. Sweet, sweet Patroclus. So I came into this fairly blind, little sparks of light here and there, and some kind of, oh, okay, I recognize that. But most of it, no, I was pretty blind going into this story. And I did appreciate that it was Patroclus' point of view. Like, it was a first person narration, and it was all from Patroclus' point of view. And as the summary said, Patroclus was Achilles' best friend, essentially. Like, his closest person to him was Patroclus. Patroclus and Achilles went like hand in hand. And coming from Patroclus's point of view, I think that was a really good pick on Madeline's part too, because Achilles is our hero. Achilles is our godlike main character, essentially, but he's not our point of view. And I think that was a good choice, because if it had been from Achilles' point of view, I think it would have been a much different story. So having it from Patroclus's point of view was a nice kind of humble way to look at this story, because though Patroclus was born as a prince, he is very quickly exiled from his family due to some circumstances, and he ends up going and living with Achilles' father, because Achilles' father has like a bunch of essentially exiled boys that he takes care of. And that is how Patroclus and Achilles get to meet, is that Patroclus is there as like a former prince, but he's been exiled, so he has no rights to his title anymore. He's not treated as a prince anymore. He is treated as, in some ways he was kind of treated less than, but under the king's care, at least he was treated a bit better, and he ends up connecting with Achilles in a way that Patroclus has never connected with anyone else. And so he is taken under Achilles' wing in a lot of way, and Achilles very much takes care of Patroclus in a lot of way, and Patroclus, I think, gives a lot to Achilles too. Like they give a lot to each other. It's a very sweet relationship that they have, and such a deep connection that becomes like deeper than even I was expecting. Again, I didn't know all the back history, so I did not know how deep this went, and I was like, oh and it was something kind of sweet to see, was this relationship between these two boys and how they helped each other, and then how they grow into men that really deeply loved each other and cared for each other. And I think looking at Achilles through Patroclus's point of view, we see a bit more to Achilles than just this big legend that surrounds him. Like, he is this prophesized boy that is supposed to help have this world of greatness, essentially. He has this big prophecy that surrounds him. There's a lot of expectations on him, and I think Patroclus helps to keep him humble in a lot of ways, and we see it through Patroclus's eyes. And though we see how wonderful Achilles is, in some ways too, we're able to see him with a bit of a softer eye that is Patroclus's eye, and I think that was a really great point of view that Madeline did. And I honestly really loved the character of Patroclus. I found, to be honest, it a little hard sometimes to get into this book. Again, it might be because I had so many other books going on. I tend to be a multi-reader, have a lot of books sometimes, and this one was audiobook, and audiobook isn't my first choice usually, but I've been getting into it more and more, and I did find myself putting this aside for a bit, finishing some other books, but then I went back to it, and after kind of a slow start, I will say, it finally did get into a nice groove where I was really able to appreciate Patroclus and his relationship with Achilles. I think once they really formed that bond together, it really drew me in and kept me hooked on this book from then on out in a lot of ways. And I just loved how sweet and kind Patroclus was in a lot of ways, because we come to the story seeing some of what happened to him. He's a little hard of a character sometimes to almost get into, because he's a little closed off in some ways. He's got some skeletons in his closet, and then you see though that he is kind and thoughtful. He doesn't think much of himself. He is kind of someone who talks down on himself a little bit, especially with his exile and everything that happened, how his father treated him. But we do see that he really cares for people, especially once they finally get to Troy. So there's a big, huge part of this book before they even get to the story of Troy. Again, that's kind of why I was kind of surprised where it was going, but it was a really big part. That was kind of what you had to slog through in some ways to get to what happened in Troy. And even that had moments where it was like, oh my god, I had no idea how long this war lasted. I think it was 10 years or something that Patroclus says in the book that it was. I had no idea that it was this long and away, and just so much going on, but yet at the same time, so much of the same going on too in some ways. But you see Patroclus, how kind and compassionate it is when he comes across one of the maidens that is stolen, essentially, and is essentially going to be like a love slave to these men. And because Achilles is as powerful as he is and is like this god among these men, essentially, because he's this ultimate warrior of the Greeks, he gets first dibs, essentially. And Patroclus begs him to take Briseis because he knows how these other men are and how brutal they're going to be with this young maiden who just lost everything. And so Patroclus ends up essentially saving Briseis, and just that, the relationship between Patroclus and Briseis too, like I wanted a bit more of that almost. Like I was so in love with their sweet, kind relationship too, because they were like best friends to each other, and I love some kind people that treat others with kindness and compassion. Speaking of Briseis though, I can't really speak too much of Briseis without mentioning Agamemnon. Agamemnon was callous and brutal, and oh my goodness, like just did not like him at all. But even his awfulness, Agamemnon, that first wanted Briseis, he paled in comparison to how horribly horrid Pyrrhus was. So for anyone who doesn't know Greek mythology, Pyrrhus, I believe his name is Pyrrhus, he is the son of Achilles. Yeah, you have to read the book to kind of find out how he's the son of Achilles, but he is the son of Achilles. And Achilles, while had a Greek goddess, kind of a lesser goddess of Thetis' mother, that was his mother Thetis, he wasn't raised with the gods. Like she came in and had a lot of influence on him and kept kind of touching base with him and keeping track of him and wanting him to live his destiny. He was still raised by humans though, so he had that human heart, and he also had Patroclus too, which really humbled him and kept him grounded a lot. Whereas his son, oh boy, raised completely by the goddess Thetis, and horrible character, just horrible. Interesting character, but a horrible just what he tries to do to Patroclus, like I think we had to have him to just compare to Achilles, because sometimes Achilles you could be a little off-putting, though we are seeing it from Patroclus's eyes, so Patroclus does love Achilles. But when you compare Achilles to his son, whew, Achilles is suddenly like, okay Achilles, we like you a lot better. Your son, not so much. Speaking of Thetis though, the goddess of Thedas, I was really intrigued by her. Anytime that she was in the book or Patroclus mentioned her, I wanted to know more about her. I think that's a bit of my fascination with the Greeks, because a lot of my fascination with the Greek history is my fascination with Zeus and Aphrodite and Apollo and all of them, all of those, the big ones, and all the little ones sprinkled in between too, and how they all kind of connect and things like that. Like I have been very fascinated with some of that. So Thetis was someone that I was very intrigued by and wanted to know more. Like I almost wanted to delve more into who Thetis was. But this is a story of man, and though Greek gods are very fascinating, that's why there's so many different books about them, like Percy Jackson over there. Though we are very fascinated with Greek gods and goddesses, at the heart of it, we want to connect with like humans a lot, and humans tend to be the driving force of some of these stories and the human experience. So it's natural that this would be more looking at the human side, but I just was very fascinated by Thetis and just wanted to know more about her. She scared the crud out of Patroclus half the time, but I just wanted to get to know her more. I'd almost be fascinated in seeing like more of a story where it's like the perception of Thetis's point of view. Like, what did Thetis think? What did Thetis feel with all of this going on? I'd almost be fascinated to see that. But again, like I said, this is a story about men. Speaking of men, the man that did the narration for the audiobook, I think, was really great. So I want to make sure I get his name right. Fraser Douglas for the narration of the audiobook here. Fraser Douglas, we can't even see, but Fraser Douglas, I thought, did a phenomenal job at reading this book. If I had been doing an audiobook on this book and it wasn't Fraser Douglas, I think I would have dropped the story and probably DNF'd it, because it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. There's a lot of different characters. There's a lot of people with sometimes similar sounding names and similar sounding situations going on. There's a lot of characters, like so many to keep track of, that he did such a phenomenal job in the audiobook version, being able to like having distinct voices for each different person, and it really helped me to be able to be like, oh, that's that guy, and oh, that's that guy from like over there and from back there, because we have people coming back from like years ago that come in and just like all over the place. So it was a nice way to kind of try to keep it straight. Didn't keep it 100% straight. There was still some moments when I was like, huh? But I think it kept it better than perhaps if I had been listening to someone else maybe narrate it, because maybe they wouldn't have given as much characterization that Fraser did. So Fraser did an excellent job, and the audiobook was really enjoyable to listen to him, with him just giving all of that voice. Plus his voice was just beautiful to listen to as well. Very much felt like a very authentic, like older book, which is the style that Madeline was going for. So I have heard reports that Madeline had kept it this kind of older style. Like there's a very much the way this is written, it's very flowy, it's very poetry like in some ways, and she had said she wanted to write it that way because she wanted to keep it almost authentic to how books were written back then, like in similar way of the Iliad. So that's where I'd really love to read that book, to compare it to this one, to see where they're similar and how close it was in that way, because Madeline wanted it to be like a story of yesterday. Now I do also love that Madeline focused on the story and the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles. I said this a bit before in the beginning where we were focusing on them, and I know there's some controversy. I've seen little like murmurings about whether Homer even intentioned for Patroclus and Achilles to be that close and connected, and I'm sure there's going to be some people that are like, no, it was taken. But you know what? This is Madeline's interpretation of it, and I think she did a wonderful job. And I loved the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles. Again, I think that's part of what kept me drawn to wanting to know more, is to find out what was happening between these two men and how they were going to keep their love going through all of this heartbreak and just destruction happening around them. And I think, honestly, seeing that, I think it just helped me connect more with these two characters as well, because it gave them a vulnerability and it gave them a personification that made them more human, is to be loved and to be vulnerable and to be together. Like, I think that was beautiful. It was a beautiful love to see bloom between them, and I hope it's a love that endures forever between Patroclus and Achilles. So overall, I give this book a 4 out of 5. I'm leaning more towards 5. I do have to say that it's like a 4.5 out of 5 almost for me. It's not quite a 5 out of 5 because some of it was a bit slow to get through, and I could see myself really having to push myself to get through some of that again. But the overall arc of this story, the love connection between Achilles and Patroclus, the story, the gods, the Greeks, the Thetis, all of that was very fascinating in so many ways. And I do really appreciate how Madeline wrote this and just how much effort she put into this, and just that she was keeping it as authentic to those older styles as she could. So to me, it's not quite a 5-star book, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close in my opinion. And as much as I think to me too, I'm sorry, perhaps I'm just not as used to reading some of the classics and things like that, so that sometimes could make it just a little harder to get into. So I don't know how much I would reread it, but I am happy to have read it, and I am happy to have experienced this book and discovered the love of Patroclus and Achilles. So for that love is a 5-star for me, but the book overall is about a 4-star. So I am happy to know more about Achilles, where he played his role in the legends of Greek history, and just the beautiful love story between him and Patroclus. So that is my review of this book. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, give it a like. I appreciate it. And always, thank you so much for watching as well. I wrote a blog post, like I said. I'll leave that in the description below. If you're interested, check it out. I always appreciate it. Have you read the Song of Achilles? What did you think? Did you think it was too overhyped and that's why you didn't reach for it? It's kind of, to be honest, it's almost why I didn't, but it's Greek, so I had to give it a peruse at least. But what did you think? Did you really love it? Did you love the character of Patroclus? Did you love Achilles? Let me know. I'd love to hear it. Thank you again, and thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you so much for being here. Take care of yourselves, and you will see me next time. Bye!